Martin's heart. He walked down the prison hallway, bent under the weight of a thin mattress that an employee had given him. The mattress, quite worn, had cotton clumped together in tufts that resembled camel's wool. Charles always knew how to enjoy every moment of life. Even when the guard accompanying him asked him to quicken his pace, he did not let himself be shaken. Order is order, thought the old man, tightening his grip on the strap of the bag he was carrying. Throughout his career in correctional institutions, the guard was somewhat envious of Charles's burden, but he had never accompanied such an elderly prisoner. And it was at that moment that, taking advantage of the situation, the man whispered something, perhaps a word of encouragement or a thought that crossed his mind. Secretly, the guard whispered to Charles Martin, "If anyone starts offending you or anything like that, don't hesitate. I'll do my best to help you." Charles smiled and shook his head. "Thank you, dear man, but I caused this situation myself and I will have to resolve it." The guard was surprised, shrugging his shoulders, but did not insist. "As they say, master." Finally, at the end of the prison corridor, Martin realized he was being taken to a corner chamber, away from the security checkpoint. "Yeah, it looks like there's a difficult prosecutor here too," thought the old man, bitterly. The warden then ordered the elderly prisoner, "Stop and stand against the wall." While swinging the keys, he opened a huge iron door. "Well, retired, now you're going to your new home. In a few years, this will be your place," said the director, harshly. The director, giving words of encouragement, seemed to be bursting with enthusiasm. When the bolts slammed into Charles Martin's shoulder, he squinted and crossed the cell threshold. At the same moment, he was hit by unbearable heat and the characteristic stench of that environment. His head started spinning, and he leaned his shoulder against the wall, trying to deal with the initial shock. Deciding to adopt a bolder stance, Martin decided not to show fear to the other prisoners. He had worked as a hunter for almost 40 years and had faced many difficult situations. He remembered encountering a bear on a narrow path and fighting against poachers who lacked courage. Martin's determination was unwavering. He knew he would be isolated from the outside world for the next 5 years. Freedom desired, he thought, as he turned to his cellmates and said, "Hello, everyone." Martin realized he needed to act, even if it was just a start. The response he received was indistinct, a murmur that seemed to address everyone in the cell. The old man reflected, feeling like a disembodied spirit. "Nothing can be done in life, everything is for the better," he thought, trying to control his internal turmoil. There were a lot of people in the cell, and for the first time in minutes, Martin felt a little confused, looking for an empty place between the rows of two-level bunks. Fortunately, he wouldn't have to admire prison life for long. Soon, a hoarse voice echoed in the corner of the cell, where thieves' notes could be identified. "Hey, old man. Why are you just standing there like a statue to admire?" Trying to make out the faces of his interlocutors in the dim light, he replied that yes, he would like to find a place to put his mattress and prepare to spend the days to come. That night, Martin heard the prisoner say, "Well, I'll help you with that." He squeezed between the narrow rows of bunk beds and approached, almost close to the old man. The stranger was naked from the waist up, and his thin torso was covered in tattoos that, to Martin, looked like nothing more than a child's drawings. "You're going to live in a chicken coop, old man. Unfortunately, there's no other place for you," said the prisoner, with a wicked smile and cruelly half-closed eyes. Charles Martin tensed internally, realizing that there was something hidden in his cellmate's words. "What kind of chicken coop is this? Is there something here?" he asked, surprised. "I didn't hear and I couldn't distinguish the bird's characteristic cluck," thought the old man, as the cell filled with murmurs and laughter, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and distrust. The prisoners roared with laughter, many nodding their heads in approval, amused by the newbie's joke. Hardened criminals could hardly imagine that an old man, who grew up in a remote Siberian village, knew nothing about the prison hierarchy. The only person who didn't laugh was the convict in front of Charles Martin, whose eyes revealed malice and hatred. "Good joke, old man, but if you keep mocking, I'll break your ribs in an instant. Haven't you realized where you are yet?" The prisoner continued, "With the roosters, you will live well, next to the crouches. See, the bed is next to the bucket, that will be your place." The words were said deliberately, in a mocking tone, so that everyone in the cell could hear. Charles Martin looked around, sensing the growing tension and discomfort in the situation. Astonished, Charles Martin looked at the space assigned to him. He realized that this was the most shameful place in the cell, which automatically placed him in the category of degraded prisoner. Tears began to well up in his eyes as he understood that he would not be able to face the attacker, a young man stronger than him.
Meanwhile, a tall young man jumped down from the top bunk and interrupted the scene, looking questioningly at Martin. "Hey, Paulo, why are you worrying about this?" he said, addressing the attacker. The tattooed prisoner tensed, not understanding what was happening. The atmosphere of chaos in the cell increased, and young Paulo's look full of anger and helplessness only intensified the tension. Charles felt that the situation could escalate at any moment as he tried to find a way to gain a foothold in the hostile environment. The old man's defender was imposing and strong, capable of offering resistance in a fight, which could undermine Paul's authority. Therefore, the young prisoner limited himself to words, trying to express his contempt. "You will not interfere with K. Lily. I resolve my affairs with the old man myself. And why should I ask this father, Carl? He probably took a bag of corn from someone else's field," said Paulo, throwing accusations. He turned to Charles Martin, stating that the old man was completely wrong. "You're here by crime, not by chance," he threw in Charles's face. The old man felt his cheeks flush as he replied, "Myself. I really didn't do anything." Paulo, with a sarcastic smile, replied, "Ah, did you rape someone, grandfather? Looks like you're on your way to the hen house, then. They don't like rapists in prison." He rubbed his hands, visibly satisfied with the situation, while Charles tried to contain his humiliation and fear at the threats. Charles Martin gathered his courage and, his voice shaking with tension, said, "I'm under arrest for attempted murder, my son. I wanted to shoot the prosecutor and his friends, but at the last minute I couldn't get up." He talked about how he had shot everyone with grapeshot, expressing his frustration. After these words, the cell exploded in laughter and applause of approval. The prisoners crowded around the old man, pushing past each other to hug him and shake his dry, wrinkled hand. To see the man who wasn't afraid to challenge his own prosecutor up close. On the other hand, Paul, consumed by fierce hatred, retreated to his corner, where he felt like a king. He realized that the time to humiliate the old man had passed and that he now needed to wait for a more convenient opportunity. The prisoners in the cell, oblivious to any plan of revenge, continued to celebrate Martin's courage. Paul's hatred for Charles Martin was not the result of external hostilities or ancient rivalries. In fact, Paulo had secretly received a substantial sum from the prosecutor, in addition to the promise of help with his parole, if he eliminated the old man from the face of the earth. Meanwhile, K. Lily approached Charles Martin, offering to help with his belongings. "Stay by my side, it will be calmer, and you will be a good neighbor." "I'm sure of it," said the young man, shaking the old man's hand as he organized his things. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, and soon the cell fell into an uneasy sleep. The prisoners seemed not at all bothered by the dim lamp on the ceiling, which resembled a lunar disk lost among clouds. Among the inmates, one snored loudly, another moaned, and someone called his mother in a childish way, breaking the silence of the night. While everyone in the cell fell into a deep sleep, Charles Martin remained awake, turning from side to side. He reflected on his past and the events that led him to those walls. Just a few months ago, your life was completely different. He had a job he enjoyed and a granddaughter, Mila, who had become his biggest reason for living. Charles had long worked as a hunter, feeling at home in the primeval forests and vast pine forests. Mother Taiga always welcomed him. Unfortunately, his family life hadn't worked out from the start. When he returned from the army, full of hopes and ambitions, the first thing he did was realize his dream of becoming a hunter. At that time, he didn't think about starting a family, only getting married after he was 30, when he met the beautiful Tamara. These memories stayed with him as the reality of prison became increasingly oppressive. Charles Martin frequently traveled to the village on his activities as a hunter, and his meetings with Tamara, during the period of their courtship, were filled with romantic moments that lasted about 6 months. When he asked for her hand in marriage, she happily agreed. Quickly, the newlyweds, with the help of the villagers, built a small log house at the edge of the forest. It seemed that a happy family life awaited Charles and Tamara, full of joy and memorable experiences. In the early days, everything really unfolded this way, until, inevitably, the wife became pregnant. For Charles, this was the most desired news of his life. He was ready to carry his beloved in his arms, surrounding her with care and attention. Tamara's pregnancy was uneventful, but when it was time to give birth, everything changed. Suddenly, it was revealed that the fetus had complications that no one expected. Tamara was in the wrong position, and the obstetrician at the local hospital, unable to help, advised Charles to take the woman in labor to the district hospital. After examining Tamara, the doctors assured Charles that everything would be fine and told him to wait. Restless, Charles paced from side to side, unable to find a comfortable place due to anxiety. Every minute that passed increased the tension in his heart. When the obstetrician finally left, his eyes hidden, Charles felt butterflies in his stomach. The doctor said he had a healthy daughter, but before he could feel joy, worry took over his mind. "What's wrong with my wife? Please tell me what's wrong," Charles begged, holding on with all his might not to scream, his shaky voice brimming with desperation. "Please accept my information. My condolences, but unfortunately the child's mother could not be saved. The birth was difficult and there was extensive internal bleeding." "We did everything we could," said the doctor, avoiding looking into the distressed man's eyes. Charles went out and sat down for the first time on a bench in the maternity ward's courtyard. For many years he cried, not understanding why fate was so cruel. In an instant, he received the joy of fatherhood and at the same time was deprived of his beloved wife. Not even 33 years old, Charles became an inconsolable father, holding his little daughter in his arms and calling her Lily. Despite the loss, he didn't give up.
Before I continue, I need to tell you something. Do you want to attract a lot of money into your life? Check out the powerful and secret Tesla ritual that I will leave in the first pinned comment, and start transforming your financial life. Let's continue.
He did everything in his power to take care of the girl. Time passed quickly, while the calendar pages stood out. Needless to say, the pain was still with him, but he tried his best to make sure Lily had everything she needed. Charles had to raise his daughter alone. There was everything in his life except his father's presence. In early childhood, he strove to instill in her good, kind qualities. However, to her surprise, Lily began to show a strong character from an early age, becoming a rebellious and eccentric child. Perhaps this was due to the absence of maternal affection and care. Charles, being a monogamous man, was unable to have a relationship with anyone after his wife's death. He had been working as a hunter for several years and worried that he was devoting too little time to his daughter. When Lily came of age, Charles spoiled her, fulfilling her every wish in hopes of pleasing her. However, the older Lily became, the more often she scolded her father. Their relationship became more strained, and Charles found himself struggling to understand how to deal with his daughter's rebelliousness, while at the same time trying to be the best father he could. They were poor and lived in a remote, forgotten village. Charles had a small salary, and his daughter's orders were large. "Dad, why are we here? We need to move to the city. There are more opportunities and you can choose a good groom," Lily said, which made Charles even more upset. After all, he believed they were born and raised there, and he wondered who would need them in the city, especially him, who was almost 60 years old. "It's extremely difficult to convince her," thought Charles, as the conversation ended in a scandal. Lily, determined, packed her things and left the house. Charles followed her to the bus stop, but Lily was determined to leave for the big city in search of a better life. Despite his attempts at persuasion, Charles felt powerless to change the situation. With a heavy heart, he said goodbye to his daughter, knowing he couldn't stop her from following her own path. Charles, with a heavy heart, put the money he had saved for her over the years into his daughter's pocket. "Accept this, Alechka. Everything will be useful in life," he whispered, his eyes filling with tears as he saw her get on the bus. But Lily, stubborn, didn't even apologize before leaving in search of an unknown new life. For a long time, Charles Martin languished in uncertainty, waiting for news of his daughter. However, he received nothing except a few New Year's cards. In the village, rumors circulated. Some said that Lily had gotten married and was now happy, while others claimed that she was living with a drunk, experiencing hardships and relying on bread and water, especially at night. Charles revisited old photos and cried, remembering times gone by. 7 years after leaving, Lily finally returned to visit her father. Upon seeing her, Charles realized that she did not look well. His appearance showed that those were not the best years of his life. The girl was visibly haggard and thinner, with deep dark circles under her eyes. To Charles's great surprise, she was holding the hand of a girl of about 5 years old. Hugging her father sparingly, Lily quickly got to the main topic. "Parents, meet Mila, she is your granddaughter. I am experiencing some difficulties. My husband Sergey and I are moving to the border for permanent residence. He is a businessman, you understand. We intend to settle there and then take Mila home. How can you help?" Lily made orders without the slightest embarrassment. Charles, surprised, replied, "Yes, I'm happy, daughter. What are we talking about? Of course she can stay here. Love, I'm retired. I still have the strength to take care of my granddaughter for another year." Charles promptly took the baby in his arms, feeling a mix of joy and responsibility. In the evening, they spent time together, reminiscing about times gone by and reconnecting as a family. The good old days came back to Charles, remembering grand tables filled with delicious treats. The next morning, Lily left, mentioning urgent matters related to foreign passport registration. Charles, however, was unaware that his daughter would not return and would leave his granddaughter entirely in his care for many years. For the first few months, Charles Martin waited for Lily to return, checking his mailbox repeatedly for news. But when 3 years passed, he realized that, in fact, he had not raised a daughter, but rather a real cuckoo, capable of leaving a child with someone out of convenience. Apparently this is my fate. I raised my daughter alone, and now the time has come to raise my granddaughter," lamented Charles, grumbling about the cruel fate. To her great joy, however, Mila turned out to be the complete opposite of her mother. The girl was kind, caring and brought a renewed shine to Charles's life. He felt grateful for having the opportunity to raise Mila and, in this way, redeem himself from the pain of the past. Mila grew up as a smart and determined girl, listening to her grandfather in everything. For Charles, these years became the best moments in his difficult life. Mila absorbed her beloved grandfather's words like a sponge, being his constant support and faithful assistant. Martin felt he had finally found happiness, peace and comfort reigned in their home. When Mila turned 18, she flatly refused to leave the village. However, thanks to Charles's persistence and recommendations, she ended up agreeing to pursue her dream of studying. Every morning, the girl hitchhiked to the regional center, where the medical school was located. It was on one memorable day that everything changed forever. Mila was on the side of the road, giving a thumbs up to try to stop a car. Drivers passed by, but few noticed her. Charles, on the other side of the village, felt a mix of anxiety and pride, knowing that his granddaughter was about to embark on a new phase of her life, while he rooted for her to achieve her goals. Luckily, several drivers ignored Mila's request, which left her even more discouraged. Suddenly, an expensive foreign car slowed down beside him, and the man behind the wheel gently opened the door. At first, the girl hesitated, but time was running out and, in order not to be late for class, she decided to accept the stranger's offer, especially since he seemed harmless. As soon as she got into the front passenger seat, Mila noticed that there were two more guys sitting behind her. It was too late to leave, the car had already left. Trying to ward off bad premonitions, she held tight to the hope that everything would be fine. During the journey, the driver chatted animatedly, and it was clear that he came from a wealthy family in Laria. For a moment, Mila even felt at ease, thinking it could just be an ordinary ride. But as the trip progressed, an uneasy feeling began to settle in her stomach. She tried to ignore the warning signs, but her uneasiness grew with every kilometer she covered. Mila smiled, thinking that all her fears were unfounded. However, when the driver turned onto an inconspicuous road leading into the forest, the girl became visibly wary. Her voice shaking with excitement, she asked, "Where are you taking me?" "Stop the car, I'm not going any further." "I will, did you hear or not?" was the response, accompanied by laughter from the three boys. Mila's heart sank as she realized with horror that she had fallen into a trap. What followed was a nightmare that she tried with difficulty to remember. The boys abused her, taking turns trying to humiliate her, having fun at the expense of her pain. They left her in the forest, laughing and boasting about their impunity. "Tell someone if you don't mind it. My dad is a prosecutor and if anything happens he'll turn anyone into dust," they said, as Mila felt trapped in a cycle of despair. At that moment, reality became unbearable. All the dreams and hopes she had for the future seemed to have been destroyed in a matter of minutes. The girl arrived home, full of tears, while trying to adjust the dress torn by the attackers. It was late at night and she wanted to avoid being seen by the villagers. Charles Martin barely saw her, but soon realized something was wrong. He noticed the crying and the damaged clothes and, without needing words, he understood the situation. Feeling the rising anger in her heart, Mila hesitated to open up. She refused to go to the police, even though she knew that one of the attackers was the prosecutor's son. It was only a week later, after a failed suicide attempt, that Mila told Charles everything that had happened. Charles, upon hearing the story, decided he wouldn't let it go cheap. Through clenched teeth, he stated that those responsible would soon pay for their actions. Then he headed to the pantry, determined to act. Vlad, the prosecutor's son, was leaving a nightclub with his friends when Charles Martin found him a few days later. The young man wore a defiant smile, but Charles didn't hesitate to confront him about what had happened to Mila. Vlad tried to dodge, pretending not to remember. "Now don't you remember?" Charles growled, as he threw Mila's photo in Vlad's face. The situation became tense, and Vlad's friends changed their expressions, scared. In the heat of the moment, Charles, who previously only wanted to intimidate them, transformed. He took out his shotgun and fired at the attackers, hitting them in the legs and buttocks. Soon, the police arrived, and Charles, who offered no resistance, was handcuffed. Throughout the investigation, events unfolded quickly, revealing the seriousness of the situation. Charles Martin remained silent during the trial, refusing a lawyer and signing all documents presented. Considering his age and the circumstances of the case, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Shortly after the sentence, the father of one of the attackers visited him in his cell. In anger, he threatened him, promising that he would make Charles pay for his actions, insinuating that he would suffer in prison. "You'll regret it," said the man, taunting Charles with cruel words. The old man, however, just shook his head, without reacting. He turned to face the wall, convinced he was paying for an act of justice. As he spent his days in a hard bunk, Charles relived the events that led him there. Even in the midst of suffering, he believed he had fought for what was right. Finally, exhausted, he managed to sleep only at dawn. There were only a few hours left before the ascent, and, to Charles Martin's surprise, the prison was not as terrifying as he imagined. Over time, he realized that there were other people there, and if he behaved correctly, no one bothered him. As they say, we get used to everything, and Charles ended up adapting to the routine and rules of the place. Despite the diversity of the prisoners, he formed a special friendship with Kay Lilly, who defended him on the first day. Kay Lilly was a good guy, and the two established a strong bond of trust. Kay Lilly, being an orphan, did not receive packages, so Charles, feeling compassion, shared with him the treats that Mila sent him regularly. They say time heals, and after a few months, Mila managed to get back on her feet. She began to recover emotionally, showing her strength in the face of adversity. Mila began to understand that what happened to her grandfather, Charles, was also partially her fault. Determined to help, she did her best to make his prison sentence not so difficult. During this time, Charles often told Kay Lilly about his granddaughter, which created a sincere sympathy for Mila in the young man's heart. With Charles's approval, Kay Lilly decided to write a letter to the girl, sharing a little about her life. He revealed that a few years ago he worked as a private driver for a wealthy family, where he was satisfied with his job and received a good salary. This strengthened his belief that he had found a good opportunity. However, everything changed one fateful night. The owner's drunk son decided to drive himself. With the confidence of an experienced driver, he lost control of the car and ended up running over a man on the crosswalk. This tragedy would change the course of their lives. The drunk driver fled the scene of the crime, and the victim's father, an influential man, soon confronted Kay Lilly. He made it clear that the blame would fall on the young man, offering him an alternative: "I'll give you money and arrange your parole. You'll only serve 1 year and you can choose any car from my garage. If you refuse, the responsibility will be yours." Confused and without options, Kay Lilly, being an orphan and without support, ended up accepting the proposal. He took the blame and said he was the one driving. Thus, the young man found himself trapped in the same cell as highly dangerous men. Yes, Kay Lilly, you made a difficult choice, but nothing stops you from starting your life over again, said Charles Martin, trying to encourage him. This rich man, at least, can help you. Hope was faint, but there was still the possibility of a new beginning. This businessman deceived me and never gave me a penny. As soon as I was convicted, he disappeared, replied Kay Lilly, sad and disillusioned. As time passed, something beautiful began to develop between him and Mila. They exchanged dozens of letters, sharing dreams and feelings, looking forward to the day they could meet in person. Meanwhile, in prison, a criminal named Paolo planned to take revenge on Charles. He didn't know how to approach the old man, but anger consumed him. Each day, Paul became more determined to take drastic action. One morning, taking advantage of the fact that no one was watching, he took a sharp sharpener from under the mattress and headed towards Charles. Fortunately, Lily caught the maneuver in time. Running, he threw himself in front of Charles, shielding him with his body. Despite the tense atmosphere in the cell, Clylie's courage prevented the situation from becoming even more dangerous. Paolo still managed to attack Mark, who was injured and bleeding. He was taken to the prison hospital, while the attacker was placed in a punishment cell, awaiting a new sentence and transfer to another correctional facility. That day, Charles Martin felt he had been reborn. Wiping away his tears, he prayed day and night to God that Mark would survive. "Your prayers have probably been heard." To the joy of everyone in the cell, Mark managed to recover and spent more than a month in the hospital. When he was discharged, Charles had difficulty recognizing the once strong and handsome young man. Now, he started to treat Mark like a son. The old man began to see him as part of the family, considering him almost like a son-in-law, given the love that had grown between Mark and Mila. The friendly couple would still face many challenges before they finally had the chance to build a future together. Charles Martin and Mark were released on parole after serving 2/3 of their sentences, just a day apart. Upon leaving prison, they were both greeted by Mila, who had already completely recovered from the terrible incident involving the prosecutor's son. Rumors circulated that the young man was drunk, and that he had lost control of his car in an accident a year before Charles's release. However, the old hunter no longer cared about that. In his heart, he had already forgiven Stephen and his father, the prosecutor, who ended up being punished by fate for his actions. Over time, Mila and Mark got married and began to live together with Charles in a house on the edge of the forest. There were rumors that the newlyweds were expecting a baby, and Mila's belly was already showing visible signs of pregnancy, bringing joy and hope to all of them. Remembering that I will leave in the first pinned comment, a complete step-by-step guide for you to learn how to attract money into your life. If you want to learn how, go there. Did you like today's video? So leave your like, subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell. A big hug and see you in the next video.